My family smiled in public and destroyed me in private. To our neighbors and to everyone at church on Sunday, we were the perfect family. My parents always had these huge, beaming smiles as they greeted people, the kind that just radiated warmth and made others feel instantly welcome. I can still picture my father shaking the pastor's hand, his laughter echoing in the foyer, while my mother organized the coffee service, a portrait of grace and community spirit. But what nobody saw, what no one could even imagine, was that by Sunday night, those smiles would be gone, packed away like decorations after a party. They'd be replaced by a chilling, heavy silence that felt louder than shouting, or by cutting, dismissive words that left me feeling completely and utterly worthless. The contrast was so jarring it felt like living in two different worlds, with two different sets of parents. This is the story of how I learned that the picture-perfect family was just a beautiful, elaborate lie, and how I began the slow, painful process of healing from the kind of damage that no one else could even see. Growing up, my entire childhood felt like an intricately staged performance. Our family portrait was a carefully constructed masterpiece of success and happiness. My dad was a respected figure in our community, the man people turned to for advice. My mom was the tireless volunteer, the one who was always there for everyone else. And I was their crowning achievement, the polite, high-achieving, well-mannered child. We were the family that brought the 7-layer dip to the potluck, the one whose Christmas card, painstakingly shot and selected after hours of forced smiles, was always flawless and arrived first in everyone's mailboxes. I learned my lines pretty early on. It became second nature. I knew exactly how to smile on cue, how to discuss my report card with just the right blend of pride and modesty, and how to expertly dodge any questions from concerned adults that got a little too close to what life was really like behind our polished, dark green front door. This public image was everything to my family. It was more than just a preference. It felt like a sacred, fragile glass sculpture that we all had to hold perfectly still, because the slightest tremor might shatter everything. At school concerts or award nights, my parents would just beam with pride, their hands resting possessively on my shoulders as if to say, "We made this." Neighbors and other parents would tell me how lucky I was, what a blessing it was to have such loving, supportive parents. And honestly, in those fleeting public moments, under the warm glow of approval from the outside world, I almost believed it myself. The applause felt good, but it was a borrowed warmth, a temporary comfort that never ever followed me home. The second that door clicked shut, the performance was over. The stage lights went out, the chill would set in, and my private reality, the one filled with silence and shadows, would begin. What people didn't see was the suffocating, echoing emptiness that filled our house. Behind closed doors, my emotions were treated as an inconvenience, a disruption to the carefully maintained peace. If I cried after a hard day at school, I was being too dramatic. If I expressed anger or frustration, I was being ungrateful for all they provided. My feelings were either completely ignored or actively shut down. It's a concept I later learned was called emotional neglect. It wasn't loud, explosive abuse. It was a quiet, creeping erasure of my inner world, a persistent message that my feelings were wrong or simply didn't matter. I learned that my job was to be happy, or at least pretend to be, so I wouldn't cause any ripples that might disturb the family's placid public image. This created a constant state of cognitive dissonance, a deep-seated confusion that made me feel like I was going crazy. My own reality was always being rewritten by them. An entire evening of tense silence, where my parents communicated only through passive-aggressive sighs and pointed comments, would be completely denied the next morning. "What are you talking about? We had a lovely night," my mom would say, with a look of such genuine confusion that I would start to doubt my own memory. There's a name for that too: gaslighting. And it's an incredibly powerful and insidious tool of emotional abuse. It makes you question your own memory, your own perception, your own sanity. I started to internalize their narrative. I believed the problem wasn't their behavior. It was my flawed perception of it. I thought I was just inherently broken, too sensitive, and just plain wrong for feeling hurt by things they insisted never happened. It all shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the night of my high school graduation. To the outside world, it was the triumphant climax of our family's success story. My parents were the very picture of pride, posing for endless photos, graciously accepting congratulations on my scholarship to a good university. I had played my part perfectly, smiling until my cheeks ached, hugging relatives and expressing my profound gratitude. But later that night at home, after the applause had faded and the stage was empty, a tiny disagreement over my plans for the summer, I wanted to take a road trip with my friends before college, just exploded. The mask didn't just slip, it was obliterated. All the unspoken resentment, the years of controlled anger, and the bitter disappointment came pouring out. The argument wasn't really about my summer plans, of course. It was about control. It was about all the subtle ways I had apparently failed to live up to their unspoken, ever-shifting expectations. The words they used that night were surgical. They took my deepest insecurities, things I had only confessed to them in rare moments when I felt safe and vulnerable, and they turned them into weapons. I was told my scholarship was just a fluke, that I wasn't nearly as smart as my teachers thought. I was told that my friends secretly felt sorry for me, that I was a social disappointment. Every word was meticulously designed to tear down any sense of self-worth I had managed to build for myself. That I remember just sitting on my bedroom floor that night, the wood cold against my skin, their voices still ringing in my ears. And in the middle of all that searing pain, I felt a strange and sudden sense of clarity. It was as if two tectonic plates that had been grinding against each other for years finally shifted. The two realities, the smiling, perfect family in public and the cruel, invalidating one in private, they just couldn't exist together in my head anymore. The lie was too big. The dissonance was too painful to keep ignoring. And for the first time, with a certainty that was as devastating as it was liberating, I understood that the problem wasn't me. It was them. And that realization, as crushing as it was also the first tiny spark of wanting to find my way out of the darkness. The weeks following graduation were a disorienting blur of depression and suffocating anxiety. The worthlessness I felt was bone deep, a hollow ache in my chest that never went away. My parents' critical voices had become my own inner critic, a relentless, cruel narrator in my head pointing out every single one of my flaws, replaying every mistake, echoing every insult. I struggled to get out of bed. The scholarship I had been so proud of felt like a fraud. I felt completely and utterly alone, trapped in a reality no one else could see. And who could I possibly tell? If I spoke up, I'd be betraying the family's #1 unspoken rule. What happens in this house stays in this house. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I knew with a certainty that scared me that I couldn't keep living like that. The pain was just too much, too all-consuming. With my hands literally shaking, I sat down at my computer and searched for therapists in my area. The act of typing those words felt like a monumental betrayal. Making that first appointment was one of the hardest things I have ever done. It felt like a public admission that I had failed, like I was proving them right, that I really was the broken one, the source of the problem. But a bigger, quieter part of me knew it was an act of survival. Walking into that first therapy session, my heart pounding in my chest, I was terrified. But for the first time in my entire life, I felt a little flicker of hope that I was finally taking a step that was just for me and for me alone. Therapy was the first place I didn't have to perform. My therapist, a woman with a calm and gentle presence, just listened. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge, she just listened as I stumbled and hesitated, trying to describe the crazy-making contradiction of my family life. And then she gave me words from my experience. Words like hidden family trauma, emotional invalidation, and covert abuse. Hearing these terms was a profound revelation. It was like someone had finally handed me a map to the confusing, painful, and lonely place I'd been wandering in my whole life. My experiences were real, they had names, and most importantly, I wasn't alone in them. She explained that families who are obsessed with maintaining a perfect public image often create a particularly isolating kind of trauma. The constant need to uphold a facade leaves you feeling perpetually confused and makes you believe your own reality isn't real. She explained that emotional invalidation is the act of rejecting or dismissing someone's feelings, which sends the message that your inner world is wrong. For the first time, I felt truly seen. I learned that my deep-seated feelings of worthlessness weren't because I was inherently flawed. They were a completely normal response to a completely abnormal and unhealthy environment. Therapy became my one safe place to feel validated, and it was the very beginning of learning how to untangle who I was from the web of their dysfunction. My healing journey was not a straight line. It was a messy, winding path with breakthroughs and setbacks. It took a lot of dedicated and often painful work. My therapist introduced me to something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. She explained that CBT could help me identify, challenge, and reframe the automatic negative thoughts that had become second nature to me after years of criticism. For my entire life, my inner voice was a carbon copy of my parents, always whispering, "You're not good enough," or "You're a burden." CBT taught me how to become a detective in my own mind. I learned to stop, identify a thought like, "I'm going to fail this exam," and question it. I'd ask, what is the evidence for that thought? What have I done to prepare? What's a more balanced perspective? Slowly, painstakingly, I started taking apart the case my inner critic had built against me. We also worked with a different approach called narrative therapy. This type of therapy helped me see my life as a story. For so long, the story I told myself was that I was the flawed, problematic character in a perfect family. Narrative therapy gave me the power to become the author of my own story, not just a minor character in theirs. I started to reframe what happened to me, not as events that defined my character but as challenges I had survived. We would take a specific memory like a family dinner where a small mistake of mine led to a week of silent treatment and rewrite it. The old story was, I ruined everything. The new story became, I was a child navigating a difficult environment and I showed resilience. That shift was monumental. It allowed me to see my story as one of strength and survival, instead of one of shame and inadequacy. Childhood emotional trauma can completely hollow out your sense of self-worth. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my worth through achievements, good grades, awards, compliments, desperately hoping that if I was perfect enough I would finally be worthy of their love. My therapist helped me understand the radical idea that self-worth is inherent. It's not something you have to prove or earn. But knowing that in your head and feeling it in your heart are two very different things. Rebuilding my self-worth was an active, conscious process, like building a house brick by painful brick. I started small, with practices that felt foreign and almost selfish at first. I learned to practice self-compassion, to give myself the same kindness and understanding I would easily give to a friend. When that inner critic got loud, screaming, "You are a failure," I learned to respond with a quiet but firm, "You are trying your best and that is enough." I started a journal where I forced myself to list my strengths and accomplishments, however small, forcing my brain to see the good things I had always brushed off as insignificant. I started taking myself out on dates, to a coffee shop, a museum, a park, and learned to ask myself a question I had never been encouraged to even consider. What do I want to do? Each small act, each moment of self-kindness, was another brick in my new foundation, a quiet little declaration that I mattered just because I existed. Perhaps the hardest and ultimately most empowering part of my healing was learning to set boundaries. Boundaries are essentially the rules you set to protect your own mental and emotional peace, but in my family they were non-existent. My needs were secondary to the family's image. Saying no to anything felt like declaring war. My first attempt was small, but it felt like climbing a mountain. I calmly said no to a last-minute command performance holiday visit, explaining that I already had other plans. The pushback was immediate and intense. Guilt trips, accusations that I was being selfish, that I didn't care about the family. The old me, the conditioned people pleaser, was screaming inside my head to just give in, apologize, and make things okay again. But with my therapist's voice in my ear, I held firm. And while it was terrifying in the moment, something amazing happened after I hung up the phone. A profound sense of relief. I had honored my own needs, maybe for the very first time in my life. I learned that setting a boundary isn't about being cold or ungrateful. It's a necessary act of self-respect. It's about teaching people how you expect to be treated. For anyone who has survived hidden abuse, setting boundaries isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of profound self-preservation. It is drawing a line in the sand and saying, my well-being starts here. My journey is far from over, and some days are much harder than others, but it's finally my own journey. If this story sounds achingly familiar, if you've ever felt that dizzying gap between a public smile and private pain, please know you are not alone. Healing from this kind of invisible trauma is possible. I want to encourage you to share a part of your story in the comments, but only if you feel safe and ready to do so. Reading each other's experiences, knowing we are not isolated in this, can help all of us feel a little less alone. And if you're struggling, if you feel trapped, please consider the brave step of reaching out to a therapist or a mental health professional. It can be a life-changing first step toward taking your own life back. Spent years of my life pretending, holding up a polished family image that was slowly but surely crushing me. Today I'm no longer performing. I'm living. The healing process has been about unlearning all the insidious lies I was taught about my own worth and slowly, patiently, learning to trust myself. It's about accepting the painful truth that I can't change my family, but I can change how much power I allow them to have over me. The goal isn't to forget the past but to integrate it into a new story. A story where I am worthy of love and respect simply because I exist. My pain, once a source of deep shame, has become my purpose. And for the first time when I smile, it is quiet, it is real, and it is truly my own. Remember to hit that subscribe button, share, like, and drop your comment.